picture for a second two completely different worlds.
Right.
So on one hand, you have ancient Athens. Imagine like the heat of the Mediterranean sun hitting these giant marble columns, right? Citizens in woven tunics walking through the bustling agora, just passionately arguing about, the fundamental nature of the universe or justice and the human soul.
Right, the birthplace of Western philosophy.
Exactly. Pretty heavy foundational stuff. And then, on the other hand, you have a modern high school boarding house.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, think about it. Narrow, scuffed hallways, maybe some half-empty cereal boxes just left on a counter, the constant vibrating hum of group chats on phones.
Yeah, and the high-stakes daily negotiation of, like, figuring out who used the last of the hot water.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. They really do seem like they exist in just entirely different dimensions.
I mean, you wouldn't naturally put those two images next to each other, let alone suggest that, one actually holds the blueprint for the other.
Right. But what if I told you that to truly understand the secret to thriving in that modern dorm room, you actually need to sit down with a 2,400-year-old Greek philosopher?
That sounds kind of wild, honestly.
It does. But welcome to today's deep dive. We're so glad you are here with us listening today because, well, today we are looking at a really fascinating source text. It's a paper titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from Plato.
And it really is a remarkable piece of analysis, because what the author does here is take these grand, sweeping, ancient philosophical concepts and just, grounds them beautifully in the very modern, very messy, everyday realities of student life.
Yeah, it completely bridges that 2 millennia gap.
Exactly. It basically asks, how do we actually build good people?
Okay, let's unpack this because our mission today is to explore how immersive environments actually shape our character.
Right.
We're going to look at why true education is about way more than just memorizing textbooks to pass an exam. And maybe most importantly for you listening right now, regardless of whether you've ever even set foot in a boarding school, how we are actively creating the culture around us every single day.
And that concept, the creating culture part, that is the absolute core of it. I mean, the paper starts by leaning heavily into Plato's fundamental belief about communities and really human development as a whole.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, Plato basically argued that the environment people live in is incredibly powerful. Like, it isn't just a passive backdrop to your life. It is an active participant in who we become.
Right. And when we say environment, we aren't just talking about like the physical walls
Right.
or the architecture of a building or whether the dorm has nice windows.
Not at all. No. Plato's definition of environment is much deeper and way more psychological.
Okay.
It's the conversations people are having around you. It's the daily routines you follow. It's those unspoken values that you just sort of experience in the air every day.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Plato essentially believed that the human soul is dyed by the color of its environment. All of these invisible social forces shape how you see the world and subsequently, how you act within it.
Wow. Dyed by the color of its environment. It makes me think of an analogy, actually. It's like living in a terrarium.
A terrarium?
Yeah. Think about a glass terrarium sitting on a desk. You have this enclosed ecosystem, right? The quality of the soil, the amount of light shining through the glass, the moisture in the air, the water, literally every single element in that enclosed space dictates exactly how those plants are going to grow.
Right, yeah.
If the soil is toxic, the plant struggles. If the light is right, it thrives.
Well, a terrarium works as a baseline visual, sure, but let's push that analogy a bit further, because a glass box is almost too passive, right?
What do you mean?
Well, in a standard terrarium, a fern isn't responsible for the soil quality. It just sits there. But Plato's point, and the core insight the author brings to boarding life, is that in an immersive human environment, the plants are simultaneously acting as the soil, the water, and the sunlight for each other.
Oh, I like that. You aren't just in the terrarium, you are the terrarium.
Precisely the point. And the text points out that for a student, boarding life is one of the most immersive educational environments a young person can possibly experience.
So what does the soil look like in this scenario?
It includes a very specific set of factors. It is the attitudes of your peers. Like, are they cynical about learning, or are they supportive of trying hard?
Right.
It's the tone set by the staff. It is even seen in the physical manifestation of respect, like, how shared spaces are treated. Is the common room left a total mess, signaling that someone else is always expected to clean up? Or is there a collective pride in keeping it nice?
Which speaks volumes without anyone having to actually post a rule on the wall. The environment is the rule. What's wild to me, though, is how passive we usually are about this. Like, you just walk into a new space, a new dorm, a new office, and you just absorb the vibe. You just conform to it.
And what's fascinating here is that the text emphasizes a critical shift from that passive absorption to active participation.
Okay.
Because when students actually understand this environmental influence, when they see the psychological terrarium for what it really is, they can make conscious choices about the culture they're helping to create. They stop just absorbing the environment and realize, hey, I have agency here.
Which brings us to, I guess, the ultimate question. What exactly are we trying to shape here?
Right.
If this boarding house environment is molding these students, what is the desired end product? And I actually have to push back here for a second because I want to play devil's advocate.
Go right ahead. The friction is where the learning happens.
We are talking about these high-minded ideals, but let's be brutally honest about modern education for a minute.
Okay, let's do it.
Parents are paying massive tuition fees for these rigorous boarding schools, sometimes like astronomical amounts of money, and they aren't doing it just so their kid can sit in a common room and ponder the nature of the soul.
That's very true.
Society basically tells us that the primary point of going to a school like this is to build intellectual ability, crush your AP exams, build an Ivy League-worthy resume, and, get a lucrative career.
Yeah, academic and material success is kind of the entire ballgame for a lot of people.
Right. So how do modern schools actually balance Plato's ancient ideal with the cutthroat, metric-driven reality of modern college admissions?
Well, it is entirely understandable why people feel that way, and I mean, the pressure is incredibly real. But the text, and it's leaning directly on Plato's Republic here, it counters that cynical view strongly.
How so?
Plato argued that if you only train the intellect, you are essentially just creating a more clever menace to society. True education has to go far beyond just academic success.
Wait, really? So churning out straight-A students who go to Harvard isn't enough to call an education successful?
Not if those students lack a moral compass. I mean, academic learning builds intellectual ability, yes, and that is necessary. But the text makes a really crucial distinction. While academics build your intellect, it is your character development that builds long-term, sustainable life success.
Okay, that tracks.
True education must also develop what the ancient Greeks called arete, which translates roughly to virtue or excellence.
Virtue. I mean, that's a word that sounds very marble columns and togas.
It does, yeah.
It feels a bit disconnected from, like, a 16-year-old stressing over a chemistry test. How does the text actually define virtues in a messy, modern setting?
Well, it strips away the ancient stiffness and defines it through action. The paper explicitly lists qualities like integrity, responsibility, fairness, and self-discipline.
Oh, okay.
So it's not about being a saint. It's about being a functional, reliable member of a community.
But how do you actually teach that? Because you can't just hand a teenager a multiple-choice worksheet on fairness and expect them to suddenly be this highly principled person. Integrity isn't something you can just, like, memorize on flashcards.
And that is exactly why the boarding environment is so critical to this philosophy.
Yeah.
You don't just study these virtues, you are forced to practice them.
Right.
The environment provides the friction necessary to build the muscle. The text outlines the daily, sometimes agonizing ways boarders practice these virtues, often without even realizing they are in a moral training ground.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that, because I feel like this really grounds the philosophy. One of the first things mentioned in the source is respecting community rules and expectations.
Yes.
Which, if you are a teenager, probably just feels like arbitrary adult control, like don't play music after 10 p.m. From a developmental standpoint, what is actually happening in a student's brain when they follow that?
It is about moving past egocentrism. When a student respects a noise curfew during study hours, they aren't just, following rules. They are actively practicing self-discipline and fairness.
Oh, I see.
They are literally wiring their brain to acknowledge that their immediate personal desire to blast their favorite song is not inherently more important than the needs of the community who, need quiet to study.
That makes total sense. It's like microdosing empathy.
Exactly.
But respecting a noise curfew is kind of just baseline compliance, right? The real test of character happens when things get uncomfortable. And the text mentions acting honestly even when it is challenging.
Yes, and that is where the concept of arete really gets tested. It's easy to be honest when there are no consequences.
Sure.
But what happens when owning up to a mistake means you might face a suspension? Or what happens when telling the truth means socially alienating yourself from a peer group that, wants you to lie for them.
Oh man, that is heavy lifting for your character. That's the 2 a.m. panic where you have to decide who you actually are.
Which ties directly into the final practice the text highlights, which is taking ultimate responsibility for your behavior and choices.
Right.
Plato's argument is that you cannot separate the mind from the character. If a boarding school produces a brilliant student who lacks integrity and shirks responsibility, well, the education has fundamentally failed, no matter what their exam scores say.
Okay, so practicing virtue sounds great in theory, but let's look at the logistical reality of a boarding house for a second.
Okay.
You take 50 teenagers from wildly different backgrounds, different families, different socioeconomic statuses, maybe even different countries. You throw them into a brick building and basically say, be virtuous.
Right.
I mean, that sounds like the setup for a reality TV show, not a philosophical utopia. How do you actually get a group of disparate hormonal individuals to form a cohesive community?
It all comes down to the psychological mechanism of shared identity. Plato believed that strong societies are only formed when individuals feel connected to a shared purpose. They have to believe they are part of a larger whole.
But how do you manufacture that shared purpose? You can't just tell them they have it right.
No, you build it through structured, shared experiences, which honestly often involve shared effort or even shared mild suffering.
Mild suffering, right?
Yeah, if you are just a collection of individuals renting beds under one roof, you don't have a community. In boarding life, this sense of belonging is forged through things like house events, communal traditions, and group service.
Right. The text talks about leadership projects and regular opportunities to contribute to the daily life of the community, like mandatory weekend cleanups.
Yes. Think about the psychology of, like, a weird house chant before a sports game, or the collective groan of having to clean up the common room together after someone floods it.
Oh, yeah.
When students engage in these shared experiences, they are breaking down barriers. They are developing teamwork by working alongside someone they might never naturally hang out with. They are expanding their social awareness through, forced proximity and shared goals.
It's the difference between just renting a room in a hotel where you expect someone else to change your sheets versus actually living in a home you help maintain.
And that shared maintenance builds a really deep, profound sense of psychological ownership.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it's not all just singing house songs and experiencing harmonious teamwork. Building character requires conflict.
Absolutely.
It requires friction. And the text introduces Plato's most famous teaching method for dealing with this friction: dialogue.
Ah, yes. Socratic dialogue. It is the absolute engine of this entire process.
Because think of Socratic dialogue like a mental gym. Just as you need physical weights to build muscle you literally have to tear the muscle fibers to force them to rebuild stronger. You need to push against different perspectives to build confidence in your own ethical judgment.
That's true.
You can't build strong ethical muscles in a vacuum. You need the resistance of other people's opinions.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Muscle hypertrophy applied to ethics. And the text notes that dialogue involves asking questions that encourage deeper reflection rather than just, shouting your opinion at someone. And boarding life offers a near constant daily stream of opportunities for these meaningful conversations about values and choices, precisely because people are constantly stepping on each other's toes.
So what does this ethical weightlifting actually look like for a student? Because I imagine it's not a bunch of students sitting around a fireplace stroking their chins saying, let us debate the nature of justice.
Oh, not at all. It looks like a disagreement over a passive-aggressive Post-it note left on a stack of dirty mugs in the shared kitchen.
Ah, yes.
That is the modern Socratic dialogue. Navigating that disagreement without it devolving into a shouting match requires ethical heavy lifting.
It's not just arguing about the mugs, it's figuring out the social contract. It's asking, why does this bother me? What do we owe each other in a shared space?
Correct. The paper outlines that students engage in this by reflecting on the impact of their actions on others. If I play my music loudly at midnight, how does that affect the person next door who has a crucial exam tomorrow?
Right.
Does my freedom supersede their right to rest?
And then there's the really tough one the text mentions, which is listening respectfully to different perspectives.
Which, let's be honest, is incredibly challenging, not just for teenagers, but for most adults in the modern world.
Oh, 100%.
But engaging with differing viewpoints, especially ones that really frustrate you, is how you refine your own thinking. You either strengthen your argument by defending it, or you realize the flaw in your logic and adjust your worldview.
So by talking it out, by debating it late at night in the dorms, or during a structured, maybe tense house meeting, they are actively defining their own moral compass. They are taking the philosophical theories and road testing them in reality.
Exactly. This raises an important logistical question, though.
Which is
Well, if dialogue is the method for building a community and shared purpose is the goal, who is actually setting the tone for that conversation? Left entirely to their own devices, a group of stressed teenagers might just devolve into Lord of the Flies.
right. Who is the conductor of this orchestra?
Yeah.
Who makes sure the terrarium doesn't grow toxic fungus? Which leads us naturally into the paper's points on leadership.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Plato held the firm view that leadership is absolutely critical for creating environments where people can flourish. Think of his concept of the philosopher king's leaders who rule not for power, but out of a sense of duty and wisdom.
Sure.
But the text makes a very pointed clarification about what leadership actually means when applied to a boarding house.
Yeah, it makes it clear that leadership is not just about wearing a prefect badge, having a fancy title, or being the one who gets to boss the younger kids around.
Far from it. The text insists that leadership is fundamentally about responsibility and setting an example. Both adult staff and student leaders bear the weight of influencing the tone and direction of the community. They are the primary architects of the environment we talked about earlier.
So how do they actually construct a positive culture? The text gives a pretty clear roadmap for this. First and foremost, by modeling respectful behavior.
Because human beings are wired for social proof. People, especially young people, will always watch what you do far more intently than they listen to what you say.
Right.
If a housemaster preaches kindness but snaps at students when stressed, the students learn that kindness is just a performance.
Exactly. The action is the lesson.
Mhm.
Next, the text talks about encouraging inclusion and kindness, actively making sure everyone feels like they have a seat at the table, and then taking initiative in improving routines or activities. If something in the house isn't working, say the weekend schedule is causing unnecessary stress, a true leader doesn't just sit back and complain about it with everyone else. They figure out a way to make it better. They take ownership.
And finally, a leader must deeply understand that their actions have a ripple effect. Everything they do influences the emotional state of others.
Which brings us to what I think is the ultimate aha moment of this entire paper. It's the concept that pulls everything we've talked about together. It is the feedback loop of boarding life. And honestly, it applies to any community life anywhere in the world.
How do you mean the feedback loop?
Well, the text basically argues that you are not only shaped by your boarding house, you also actively help shape it. It's a continuous, dynamic, two-way street. You aren't just a passive plant sitting in the terrarium waiting to be watered. You are the weather. The way you speak in the hallway, the way you behave when no one is looking, the way you contribute to a discussion. It literally alters the environment, which then dictates the experience of the person sitting right next to you.
Wow. Yeah. That is a profound realization to instill in a young person. Understanding the role of the environment isn't just an abstract academic exercise. It is the very thing that empowers students to become active, responsible participants in their own lives.
Right.
When they realize their daily, mundane choices are actively building the culture of their home, they transition from being consumers of their environment to creators of it.
So what does this all mean? When we take all these moving parts, the concept of the immersive environment, the relentless focus on virtue over just pure academic knowledge, the forging of a shared identity, the mental gym of Socratic dialogue, and the heavy responsibility of leadership, what is the end result? What kind of person emerges from that terrarium?
The paper distills the outcome very clearly. When a boarding environment is intentional, structured, and deeply supportive, the results are incredibly positive. Students don't just survive, they flourish.
In what ways?
They are significantly more likely to feel a strong sense of belonging, which is a massive buffer against anxiety. They build positive lifelong habits. They develop emotional maturity far quicker than they might otherwise. And ultimately, because they feel safe and supported, they achieve both socially and academically.
Because the environment was designed to grow the whole person, not just to optimize their test-taking abilities. They achieved the Greek ideal of arete.
Exactly. Plato reminds us across the centuries that the true purpose of education is about becoming thoughtful, resilient, responsible members of a community. Boarding life just happens to be a unique, concentrated laboratory where you get to practice that complex social dance every single day.
It's a 247 crucible for becoming a good human. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I know you had a thought about how this ancient philosophy applies far beyond just the teenagers living in a dorm.
I do. The text explicitly focuses on how borders shape the environment they live in. But I want you, the listener, to take that concept outside the boarding house for a moment. Think about the spaces you move through every single day as an adult. Think about your workplace, your family home, your friend groups, even the digital communities you participate in.
Your own personal terrariums.
Precisely. You are immersed in them, but you are also creating them. If your mere presence, your attitude, and your daily habits are constantly, quietly shifting the culture around you, what exactly is the invisible curriculum you are unknowingly teaching to the people next to you right now?
Wow, that is definitely something to sit with. Are you providing the light or are you poisoning the soil? We want to enthusiastically thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you walk away looking at the spaces you inhabit and your own power within them just a little bit differently. Stay curious, keep learning, and we will see you next time.